Okay, I can now share it. Okay, are you able to see my screen?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. You don't see the notes? You just see the
Yes,
yeah.
perfect full
All right.
slide.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining. Before I begin, I would like to acknowledge the Woiwurrung and Bunwurrung language groups, the indigenous, as the traditional custodians of the unceded lands and water on which I live, work, teach, and learn, and on which RMIT conducts its business. I pay my respects to the elder past and present, and I acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded. So I would like to start with a provocation. Have we learned from the past disasters as to how to plan the present and the future? Are we still building to the building standards that are for outdated climate, only to face costly retrofitting later? This approach adds financial strain and can intensify stress and anxiety. So, what can be done about it? My answer was let's learn about post-disaster housing recovery, but have a longitudinal approach to learning about it. I'll soon answer the question, why capturing lessons about resilient recovery, as in long-term recovery, matter. This temporal dimension of recovery is super important, but why? So, as you all know, we are experiencing accelerated climate change. And those who are joining us from India would know that India is going through massive heat wave at present. And climate change is going to intensify the frequency and intensity of hazards and also make it unpredictable. So resilience considerations can provide the essential buffer that can help stabilize the system. We are living in a new abnormal, which demands innovative ways of planning, design, construction, maintenance, and governance. So there is a need for policymakers and practitioners to learn from the past to improve the future. And because of this acceleration of climate change, we do not have the luxury of time anymore. We cannot continue to make the same mistakes again and again. So that's why learning from what has worked in the past and what hasn't becomes extremely important. So this is what I have captured in the book that I wrote and got published earlier this year. And I have been visiting the same sites for over many years, some places for over 15 years. And what I'll present to you is a culmination of my research. So, firstly, I wanted to frame housing. Often, houses are seen as a physical structure. The UN Habitat defines housing, adequate housing, as something where people have land rights. It's affordable. It's habitable. It's cool when it is hot outside. It is located where you want it to be. There is cultural adequacy, as in what you want when you want to practice your social values, your spirituality. But lately, IPCC has been promoting climate resilient development. So, can we afford to just build houses for the poor because housing is a basic human right without consideration of climate to reduce poverty alone? and meet the housing rights of all? Or should we be building those houses, the houses that aren't yet built, to a standard which is for the future climate and lead the development in a direction which is climate resilient? But the question is, how do we achieve these two together? And this begs the question of resilience for whom? Is it for everyone? Yes. Of what? I was interested in the housing system. To what? Against all disruptions. So not just one hazard, but all hazard type: heat, earthquake, volcanic eruption, landslide, when and where, continuously. But let's see post-disaster reconstruction as an entry point. What are the characteristics that prove that what we have done is resilient or not? And what is the process? Is resilience a process or an outcome? So if you see resilience building, the entry point as post-disaster housing reconstruction, it's affected by the characteristics of the disaster. And we can achieve recovery that can build resilience. It can be replacement recovery or non-recovery. And here's a differentiation between what does resilient recovery mean and what does just recovery mean. And this can be considered as recovery, which is slight improvement, but resilient recovery is a continual learning and transformation and building for the future. But the key issue is how. What leads to resilient recovery versus what hinders it? So first, we defined what is housing. Is it just a physical structure? Sorry, my slides have jumped. Is it just a physical and technical structure, or is it a social? It is a system itself. It is a multidimensional asset. And these are the characteristics of resilience. So the outer box, and how are these two linked are the resilience characteristics that link with the housing. So we have framed housing as a system within a system. When I say within a system, house cannot exist by itself. It needs water pipes to go in, sewage to leave, you need roads, you need transport. So having defined the house from a multidimensional perspective, we had 6 case studies, 2 in India, 2 in Thailand, and 2 in Japan. I'll only talk about India today because there is not much time. And as you can see, these disasters were at least 7 years apart. And for each disaster, we had within each country, we had one urban area, one rural area, different disaster type, earthquake and floods in India. And they were, as you can see, we were looking back at least 13 years and maximum 30 years. So in case of 2001 Gujarat earthquake, the focus was Bhuj. The traditional houses were replaced by temporary shelters, by large development, which was culturally appropriate, clustered housing, and co-designed with communities. In case of Bihar, the traditional bamboo houses were replaced by bamboo with cement-stabilized earth plaster and an attic and lifted floor, so to protect communities from floods. And I've visited this site multiple times, and these communities have been affected by floods, but their houses still stand. So in the long term, those who did not get any assistance, they still live in these homes and are extremely poor, whereas those who were able to rebuild after 2008 floods, they now have tractors. Some of them are actually sending their kids to school. So that is the difference I could see in the long term of having a strong, robust home. So these are the resilience characteristics, and comparing the two, what we saw is India was doing really well at building structurally safe buildings. However, we were lagging behind in terms of location due to lack of land. We were also lagging behind in terms of institutional capacity for recovery program design, assistance, package development, and a timely response. Some social capacities were improved to some extent. And the other last thing was that we were not good at land use planning. The infrastructure integration, the whole land use and settlement planning was not that great. What continued from 2001 to 2008 and what changed? So the policies continued but became sophisticated, the owner-driven policy. Public-private partnership continued. From 2001 top-down governance, we saw a decentralized governance, which is worth replicating. It has amazing potential, and UNDP has identified it as a best practice, this shelter or recovery hubs, which were called as Setu Kendras. CSOs play, civil society groups play a crucial role in India because of the large population. Their government can't be everywhere, and hence there is a need for CSOs, and they do play an excellent role. Without them, we wouldn't see recovery. Land use planning is something we do lack at being prepared with risk maps and knowing these areas are worth not settling in. And pro-poor land rights were included, and it was just recovery. Justice was for all, though it was slower for the squatters and landless people, but they did recover in the long term. Social system understanding is crucial, and it is central to any recovery in India, and that can make any recovery fall apart if that is not considered. So as you can see, there is this governance system, there is materials and technical aspects, and there is the financial aspect too. So these catalyzing factors and hindering factors are noted in this framework that is developed at the end. So to sum up, I would say that there is, without government playing a lead role in having a continuous learning, capturing learnings from this one disaster and applying those learning to another one, we won't see much change. Decentralized governance in Bihar was excellent, and that is worth replicating. However, we do need proactive planning and building standards improvement. That is the provocation I started with. We need to have community involved because social system is deeply rooted and important for people in India. Lastly, everything needs to be sustained. If you are training builders of how to build in a way that can cool the buildings or that can protect them from earthquake, they need to be able to find work in that area, and we need to sustain that. And these are some hindering factors, but I'll leave it to you to read. Which of these lessons can be applied to heat? We do need a leading role from the government to map. Sorry. Okay. This is my time, is it? Okay. To map where there is more heat concentration, are there elderly and children there, and do the necessary there? So that proactive planning is required, and in terms of building standards too for thermal regulations. So we don't build buildings that need retrofitting afterwards. And the centrality of assistance package. Who will pay for the buildings that are not built to remain cool? They are built to the building standards, current building standards, but they are outdated for the current climate, for the future climate. So that becomes a major challenge for everyone to resolve. And if you're interested, I had also written a book, a report with UNEP, and that is a practical guide to climate resilient buildings. And there is a short YouTube video, which I welcome you to see. It's 3 minutes long later on. And that is what I'd leave you with. What are we doing well in India when it comes to heat action planning, and what needs improvement? You've heard my thoughts, but I'd like to hear yours too. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mitchell, really, for setting the context so clearly, as well as also, remind us that this long-term recovery is not only about rebuilding after a disaster, but it is also about strengthening safety and future resilience, multi-hazard scenario. And in your book, as you say about the new abnormal, addressing new abnormal. So by this way, this provides a strong foundation for today's discussion on extreme heat action planning. I now invite Mr. Ramraj Narasimha sir, Senior Director, Program Management and Technical Support from Coalition for Disaster Resilience Infrastructure, to share his reflection. Ramraj sir, over to you.
Thank you very much. Will you be putting on the slides, or should I share it?
Either way, what you prefer.
Okay, let me share it then.
Yes, we can see.
Do you see it in the screen?
Yes.
Thank
Yes.
you. We heard about the housing recovery from Professor Mittal, and please allow me to touch a bit upon the things that are more related to the infrastructure. I am part of the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure. So now we've heard every year that this year has been the hottest, and I think we've seen it. We are feeling the heat every part of India. So as on record, I think 2024 was the hottest year. The last year was just slightly cooler, but then this year is also very warm. Now, heat is not just felt by us humans, heat is also something that is impacting infrastructure. We have a model called GIRI, the Global Infrastructure Risk Model and Resilience Index, which allows us to calculate the annual average loss from various hazards across infrastructure sectors. And globally, about $24 billion is the global annual average loss from heat waves alone. Across all kinds of hazards, it totals close to 800 billion. So heat waves is not an insubstantial source of this kind of loss. And as you distribute it across sectors, you will see that buildings, yes, of almost half of those are felt across buildings. Power sector, which I will delve upon a bit more. Roads and railways. These feel the brunt, and these are not quite insubstantial when you look at the cumulative loss that we are dealing with. In terms of buildings, this is quite a dramatic picture of the rooftop of the museum in China, in the Forbidden City, which actually is melted because of the extreme heat during the heat waves a few years ago. Now, heat is not just impacting buildings as structurally. Heat is, if the building is too hot, then it doesn't serve the purpose for which it is built. Professor Mittal also alluded to it. In a school, for instance, every degree rise, Fahrenheit rise, probably results in there is some quantification of the learning loss in the students. About 1 degree loss is equivalent to about 1% loss in terms of learning ability of students. Heat waves on roads, everybody that is on the road at any point of time this season would have seen that it's too hot, asphalt is melting. But globally, actually, the impact is in several billions of dollars. In the EU, for instance, when we looked at the cost that is actually calculated, they estimate it to be close to about 50 million euros in the period, in the last decade, actually. Railways, the heat waves are resulting in buckling of the railway tracks, and these are resulting in derailments, which is also a safety hazard, but also a cumulative loss in dollar value. Hydropower, of course, generation itself is impacted because of the heat conditions resulting in less water for power generation. Now, this slide tries to give a overview of the impacts felt across buildings, transportation, and energy. Buildings, you can see it. We are feeling it. And then there is, of course, the reduced life of buildings because of the deterioration of the materials, the energy demand that is there, which is increasing, and then the shortages that are felt in hospitals to cater to the needs. And then the working hours getting lost in schools, as well as the impact on outdoor workers. Transportation, we saw a few images, but then there is also impact on the bridges in terms of the expansion and damages of the bridges. Runways themselves are melting. There are, studies which show that the ability of planes to take off is also hindered. The ability of the planes to carry the cargo is also hindered. The impacts are being felt far and wide. We will look at the energy in subsequent slide. Now, power sector resilience, if you look at the impact chain on your left, the extreme heat that is resulting is actually affecting the grid design them. So the grid efficiency itself is affected. One side, you have the demand surge, which is resulting in loads that are above their design capacity. Then you have the overload resulting in the transformer failures. The lines also sag, and the thermal plant outputs are also dropping because the cooling water has also. This results in outages across that we are feeling across all aspects: housing, schools, transit, and cooling shelters. All of these are prone to failure and impacts the vulnerable population who are at the most, who are at the highest level of risk. These are those that are in informal sectors also, but these are also the aged or the children. Now, when you look at the vulnerabilities of the power sector, then it is across all aspects. It's across the transmission and distribution lines, because the overhead lines are also, they are also thermally, they are derating about 1 to 2% in terms of capacity per degree Celsius increase above the design temperature. Now, underground cable heat dissipation is also constrained if the soil itself is getting heated. Thermal power plants, as we saw, are also resulting in being lesser efficient. The distribution transformer overload and overheating is resulting in their lives being reduced. And of course, this results in some of the cooling shelters and all the centers that we are planning. If they don't have the backup power, that means if they do not have own source of solar storage or DG sets, then they fail. And they also fail those that are the most vulnerable because they are depending on such centers. Now, when we looked at the global, that was the total impact, close to $6 to $9 billion in terms of power sector losses due to heat wave. But in India alone, we have close to $1.75 billion in terms of impact. Now, as we are looking at housing recovery, as Professor Mittal also touched upon it, some of the dimensions that I take personally from, having been part of a few housing reconstruction and recovery programs in Sri Lanka, in Nepal, and other countries. One is, of course, the need for knowledge and awareness, that is to engage more in terms of what needs to be built, how it needs to be built, and so on, or in the same, when we are looking at the power sector, it is the education of the public as well as the distribution companies on energy conservation, being aware of the load forecasting, and then identifying the vulnerability across the grid and sharing that information and knowledge with the city planners. In terms of technology, it is about smart meters and demand response platforms, and then taking advantage of the Internet of Things-based transformer, health monitoring, and everything. Building capacities is vital. As we saw in the previous slide, the owner-driven reconstruction collaborative was involved in the Koshi flood recovery program, and indeed they were also engaged in the post earthquake, Gorkha earthquake housing recovery in Nepal, and building capacities of the key people that are engaged in the recovery, including officials, but also across the engineers that are coming to inspect housing, the masons that are actually building, and awareness generation amongst the owners so that they are able to invest on the right material. So here, when we are looking at the training of the DISCOM field crews and the load dispatch centers, that becomes vital. One of the reasons why Professor Mittal also alluded, government involvement, ownership, and engagement. I would say that it is the local government involvement which is more actually very critical, especially for heat wave, because heat is felt globally, nationally, but then the actions are taken primarily locally. Hence, the urban local bodies, their involvement is critical, and there are good ways in which they can be involved. For instance, once the identification of the most vulnerable areas of which are prone to grid failure is known, the engagement of the local bodies to make necessary alternate arrangements is also something vital. Participation of communities, without them, nothing would happen. So again, on this side as well, for understanding heat wave impact and managing it, there is so much that needs to be done here, which could also involve the resident welfare associations. We are seeing that diesel backup itself is also failing in many of these societies. So engaging with them so that the the cooling is not, the load itself is not so high, so that it doesn't fail even the backup. And an integrated approach to is critical. Housing may be individual units, but then there are so many things that go along an individual building that make housing what it is. Professor Mittal also alluded to it. There is so much around it. That is a settlement approach or an integrated approach is critical. Hence here, when we are looking at power sector also, there are so many things that are necessary, which go beyond just the lines and then these transformers. And finally, the vulnerable population, ensuring that all of this is being done with a view of, many a times the policies are made for a larger set of population, but then there are specific groups of population that will fall out of the cover of these policies. Hence, they will need very specific care, attention, and that is very critical moving forward. Now, if you wish to sum it up, then I would say knowledge, information, governance, and capacities, technology, and engagement. Engagement not just in the form of communities of practice, not just for dialogues, but also, for instance, in generating such products or such guidance. For instance, this is a guidance that has emanated from a community of practice for heat smart schools. Similarly, a community of practice which has identified how the impact of extreme heat in public transport systems, how it is felt, how it could be addressed, some of the actions that can be taken. This was also the couple of these were developed by CDRA with a range of stakeholders. And of course, we are very familiar with the guidelines for cooling shelters, which the NDMA has launched last year. I would just like to stop with this. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Ramrajji, for highlighting the importance of infrastructure system. Your remarks help us see the extreme heat is not only a health concern, of course, that is top priority, but also an infrastructure and urban resilience concern. The economic loss and damage that it's such a very high, which require extreme heat planning and as a top priority. So thank you so much for sharing this. And also, of course, a good resource, community of practices, very useful resource. Thank you so much. Let's move ahead. I now invite Professor Rajan Raval from SAPT University, Ahmedabad, to share his reflection on housing, cooling, and built environment in the context of extreme heat. I also would like to remind participants, feel free to use chat box to share resources, to share question, response. Thank you. Over to Rajanji. Hello. Professor Rajan, are you there?
Am I audible?
Now, yes.
And is my screen visible? No.
It was showing processing, but now not.
Okay. How about now? Makes
Yes.
sense? Okay, perfect.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'll quickly talk about what's happening on ground, and especially on the heat and heat stress and the buildings. And my focus probably today would be more on affordable housing or informal settlements. But before I simply talk about heat, I want to remind all of us that when you have 1 degree rise in a temperature at the tropics, you will get about 7% increase in a relative humidity. And while we talk about heat, we also should be mindful about how humidity increases and what's a human capacity to maintain our comfort or stress when you have high humidity. Sort of, if you start looking at dry bulb temperature or a dry heat, we can tolerate up to 54 degrees centigrade. But when you start getting a humidity, we really can't tolerate anything beyond 32.5, which is a wet bulb temperature. And then onwards, it becomes very, very fatal. One of the evidence of that is when we had an air show in Chennai in October 2024, a few people lost their life. Although they were having sunglasses, as you can see, a lot of umbrellas, they were having a fluid with them, they were having a water bottles, but simply they could not manage the humidity in the air, and hence their core body temperature went up beyond certain point, and they could not manage their body well, and hence they lost the heat. So point I'm saying is that while we start talking about heat, we also should start talking about relative humidity, and this is where the buildings have a limits. Buildings can allow us to maintain temperature or rather delay the gains of our solar gains and so on and so forth. But when it comes to a maintenance of humidity, no design principles or rather passive design strategies can really help us deal with the humidity. And this is what I call it the limits of the buildings. And this is where buildings needs to be seen in the larger context of the city. And in architecture school, we are also been taught about how part to whole and whole to part. So once you start looking at part, which is just a building, if you don't look at the whole, which is a city, it really doesn't really make sense. And I'll talk about that in a while. This is what Ahmedabad temperature looks like. If you look at the horizontal axis where we have a dry bulb temperature, and the center part, which is about 36% of the time, Ahmedabad can give you a comfortable temperature in a certain relative humidity, which is between 30% and 70%. But beyond that point, if you move, either you will require certain kind of cooling or certain kind of heating. And this is what a building needs to do, that other than this 36%, which is naturally ventilated building can give you comfort, otherwise you have to rely on buildings or any other mechanical systems. This is not based on a static or westernized concept of comfort. This is based on, we call it adaptive theory. That means Ahmedabad or citizens of Ahmedabad or people living in Ahmedabad do have a different kind of thermal sensation and acceptance, and not similar to what Europeans have, or even people from Chennai and Bangalore has. So the work which I'm showing here is based on it's a very contextual or a hyperlocal context where the thermal sensation and thermal heat stress understanding is specific to Ahmedabad. And what you see, if you put that in a yearly period, about when you are comfortable at about 24 degrees centigrade or 25 degrees centigrade in winter, but in summer you would love to have about 32 degrees centigrade. So we are more like any other flora fauna, that our operative range changes. We are not like a machine that which can be put in 24 degrees centigrade and be operated across the year. A year and a time of the day and time of the year also has a major implication on our sensation and our stress. What we are doing, we are trying to understand what happens with the people who work in their own home, or rather home-based workers, especially women, in afternoon times when they carry out any kind of economic activity. Under what conditions do they work, and what would be their not just a thermal response but their physiological response as well. Sometimes some strata of the economic strata of the people really can't express themselves in terms of thermal comfort, because that's not their priority, but at least the physiology wise they will be able to express that, their body will be able to express that under what stress they are. So what we're doing is there are quite a few, I believe in hundreds houses in Ahmedabad, where we are monitoring the indoor environmental temperature, we call it, or environmental conditions, which measures the relative humidity, globe temperature, and many other parameters. At the same time, many of these occupants, or rather all of the occupants, will be given a certain kind of wearable device by which we can monitor their heart rates, monitor their skin temperature and skin wettedness, and then we try to understand what's the kidney function, or hydration level, and so on and so forth. How does their house work? As you can see here, and this is some 40-50 houses I'm showing, each color represents one house. Outdoor temperature, which is in a black dotted line, goes up during the afternoon times and comes down in the evening. But towards the evenings, buildings don't cool down. And this is what is worry to us, that buildings are supposed to give us a comfort, but they don't. And especially when there is outside, which is more and more comfortable, buildings retain heat inside, and heat and humidity inside, and then they don't really help us release the heat, or rather provide a comfort. Although during the early part of the day, the comfort level is a little delayed. They do remain a little bit more comfortable until about 12 o'clock, but then onwards, once it gains the heat, it does not lose the heat. And this is typically across all the country, entire country, where we have high thermal mass buildings. So this is where buildings probably also needs to start looking at itself in how do we really ventilate them, how do we really provide, at least if outdoors is comfortable, indoors needs to be comfortable. That's a baseline one needs to attain. That yes, when outdoors become harsh, and if you have to rely on mechanical systems, that's okay. But if outdoor is comfortable, and if indoor is not comfortable, that's not really accepted. That's not where what the building should look like. Now, what would be the change in a temperature and change in a climate which we are looking at in Ahmedabad? And again, this has been upgraded this year as well, 2026, that the hottest day based on a temperature and relative humidity are more towards the June and July, versus a dry heat, which is more towards the May type. And if you remember one of my early slides, we can tolerate up to 54 degree of dry heat, but we cannot tolerate even 35 degree of wet bulb temperature with the humidity. So most of the time, the heat action plans and heat wave projections and heat wave advisory generally stops when we get a monsoon. But actual heat stress happens when you have high humidity and high temperature days. And this is what you can see on the blue lines, blue bars, which are really stressful days as far as the physiology is concerned. Now, how do we really deal with this? And so this is another example that sometimes indoors remains higher than outdoors in a different kind of climates. So this is where I also would like to highlight is temperature versus heart rate. As you can see here, that summer temperature, which is the dry heat, a little darker red color, remains lower in terms of its heart rate. But the moment humidity goes up, in the monsoon time, your heart rate remains high. And this is what is also where the physiological limit of the body does not allow us to lose the body heat. How do we really deal? And this is where we are focusing more and more that let's not just deal with the temperature. We also need to deal with the temperature and humidity together. And then the moment you start looking at these two parameters together, kind of solutions which can come out is very, very different. Simple calculation, a body generates about 85 watts of energy, or let's say maximum 130 watts of energy. If you put a 1 ton of AC, it uses about 3,800 watts of energy. So one person which generates about 100 watts of energy, you are trying to remove the heat from the room, which is up 3,800 watts of energy, which is like huge amount of energy you're using just to cool down the room and not the person. And then if you have some appliances, you might require a little bit more. But the point is that instead of, at least in affordable housing sector and economical lower strata, probably what we should start looking at is not to build buildings and try to cool buildings or try to make buildings which are cool, just provide a comfort to individual person, because it might be too costly affair, to economically costly affair to make buildings, and that's what we are seeing across the country. But what if we start playing a role as just a person needs to be comfortable, forget about a room? And this is where we call it a personalized comfort system. There are various gadgets available which can provide a lesser heat stress to the person, and that could be customizable. It does not have a much of energy requirement, and depending upon where people is sitting, how they're working, it can be moved around here and there instead of cooling down the entire building or entire room. So what we say is that just focus on just focus on human body. Don't focus on a structure as well, because at this point in time in 2026 or maybe about 2035, we need to deal with the human body first. Then probably we might be better off to start dealing with the buildings. We can delay that process a little bit more. And this is what the physiology suggests, that what kind of body parts, which body part needs to be maintained at certain temperature. And that's what my work at CEPT revolves around, including where we look at the physiology, we look at the building materials, we start looking at the cooling technologies and trying to put things together that immediately what can be done when we start building, when you have to provide a cooling or reduce the stress. This is where I was saying part to whole to part. It's even if I start making individual rooms, individual spaces, probably I need to focus a little bit more on outdoors also. That person is not going to remain indoors all the time. He will have something outdoors. This is what we've been taught in the schools, that just don't focus on buildings, also focus on urban areas, focus on neighborhood levels. And a classic example in most of the Indian cities is, if you remember first slide, 36% of time Ahmedabad can give you comfort. But if you really have a building in Ahmedabad or in Bangalore or even in Chennai, you might not be able to use that 36% not because of the thermal activities, but because of the noise outside, because of the dust outside, because of the mosquitoes outside. And these are the interventions where we need to make sure that not just a building, not just a body, but also the cities needs to provide a comfortable environment to reduce heat stress and also reduce the emissions. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Professor Raval. Really useful and very practical, your input, so that cooling must be understood beyond technology alone, and especially the target tones that you mentioned and highlighted is really important for all of us while planning, while in execution, and while doing further research. So thank you so much, Professor Rajan. Moving ahead, as we're running a bit late, but very interesting points, aspects coming out. So I now invite Ms. Lata Sachdev, co-founder of Kutch Mahila Vikas Sangathan, to share community-based experiences, particularly on women's role, local leadership, and disaster resilience. Ms. Lata, over to you. Your voice is... Lataji? Somehow we are not getting your voice. Okay. Maybe it may take a couple of minutes while Lataji is sifting either system or reconnecting. And we will get back to you, Lataji, in a couple of minutes. Meanwhile, as we have many questions received before and now, so and it is our commitment to address each one by one, and it is a high possibility that we need to address through email. But so be patient, but feel free and keep continue raising your point, sharing directly in our message and also by email. So thank you so much. On the other side, by the time Lataji join, would like to ask this question to Dr. Mitul. What can be done by all to move closer to cooling each year based on your recent this book highlight a lot of recovery aspects, resilient recovery aspect. So can you please share what can be done by all to move closer to cooling each year for the future? Thank you.
That's a very big question. And as my colleagues here have also mentioned, and there are so many parallels in what we all presented. Trying to retrofit buildings after having built them with high embodied energy is always going to be tricky. And as Professor Raval also mentioned, that we don't think about buildings. We have to think of the outside. Ramrajji also said about settlement-based approach. And that's exactly what I also found in or noted in the book, that we need a whole of place-based community approach, whole of settlement-based approach. Because, for example, if there are 5 apartments in one area, and you do green wall on one of the apartment, but rest are just, you don't do anything. You're very close to a river or something, and there would be floods. You can't protect yourself unless you have some nature-based infrastructure to protect all of them. That is an example of floods, sorry, not about heat. What can be done? Firstly, we need some policy changes in terms of building standards and ensuring that we consider indigenous materials that have low embodied energy and how do we build with those. In Europe, for example, they are mandating bio-based construction system. And bio-based means all natural growing materials, hemp, mushroom, mycelium, timber. We are far from that, but we have enormous knowledge with and lots of indigenous materials. And India is good with that. We have created guides for how to use bamboo, how to use cement stabilized mud, rammed earth. We are quite proactive in that. But alongside that, we also need to build capacity. In 2001, the government of Gujarat, they also teamed up with vocational training centers. And masons who were trained in how to build earthquake-safe homes were then able to go and have training to get an international certificate of that they are certified masons to build in earthquake zone 5 safer buildings. Then these masons were also taken to Aceh. They had never set foot on plane before. They couldn't speak English, but they spoke the language of hands. So we need that capacity building in terms of how whatever new technology or improved past or traditional technology we are trying to adopt, do we have the skills to actually implement them? And in terms of retrofitting existing buildings, Rajan Raval's presentation was spot on in that regards. There are many examples in the practical guide that we have given, and there are things you can do on the roof, such as covering with a shade structure, growing creepers there. People are painting with lime on the roof, putting coconut fiber on the roof to create that air pocket so that it doesn't heat up as much. We used to put a shade outside the window. So there are small things that can be done, but indoors, please go with what Professor Raval has mentioned. Instead of cooling the whole house, can you cool just the human body?
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Mitchell. Very useful, particularly about the capacity that you reflected. And, not with intention, but unintentionally, we many times highly focus on the vulnerabilities. And maybe that is easy to start, but the capacity, that is very important, and especially dealing with this new abnormal. Lataji, are you there? And Lataji, are you there? Hello. Okay. Maybe may take a couple of more minutes. Meanwhile, don't
Can you
want to.
hear now?
Yes, now yes. Over to you, Lataji.
मेरा पीपी की
There is an echo if you have kept on your two mic, and I request you to mute once. Yeah, thank you.
Now it's clear?
Yes, clear. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. हेलो, मैं हिंदी में बात कर सकती हूँ?
हाँ जी, प्लीज.
ओके. मैं कच्छ महिला विकास संगठन से हूँ और आप सब जानते हैं कि कच्छ के अंदर बहुत सारा डिजास्टर होता है, जैसे ड्राउट है, साइक्लोन है और अर्थक्वेक है. तो ये कच्छ पूरा जो डिस्ट्रिक्ट है वो भारत का सबसे बड़ा एक लार्ज डिस्ट्रिक्ट है और इनमें बहुत सारी दिक्कतें भी हैं, और हमने जो काम किया है वो महिलाओं के साथ काम किया है। सबसे पहले साइक्लोन के दौरान जो मुसीबतें होती थी, उसमें सबसे पहले हमने यहाँ कच्छ की जितनी ऑर्गेनाइजेशन है उनका एक नेटवर्क 98 में तैयार किया था, और सब संस्थाएं मिलके एक नेटवर्क बना के इस डिजास्टर को कैसे हम सामना कर पाए या उससे बच सके, उनका एक प्रयत्न किया गया। दूसरी बात थी कि डिस्टेंस बहुत है, तो तुरंत ही कुछ मैसेज भेजना है या रिलीव करना है तो उसके लिए भी थोड़ा मुश्किल है। दूसरी बात है कि यहाँ लोकल जो ऑक्यूपेशन है वो ड्राई फार्मिंग ज्यादा है। जो मानसून बारिश से जो खेती होती है उनके ऊपर ज्यादा कम्युनिटी गांव स्तर पे डिपेंड रहते हैं। इरिगेशन बहुत कम है। और जो और मुसीबत आती है महिलाओं के ऊपर, वो चैलेंज ये है कि जब ड्राउट है और पशुपालन उनके संलग्न एक दूसरा ऑक्यूपेशन है, तो मवेशियों के लिए यहाँ पानी और चारा इकट्ठा करना वो मुश्किल काम है। तो उनके लिए भी कच्छ से बाहर उनको माइग्रेट होना पड़ता है। तो इनके लिए पीछे जो रह जाते हैं, या बुजुर्ग रह जाते हैं, या बच्चे रह जाते हैं, या महिलाएं रह जाती है, तो सारी जिम्मेदारी है वो महिलाओं के ऊपर आ जाती है कि घर को चलाना है, संभालना भी है और कमाना भी है। और जो मवेशियों के साथ माइग्रेट करते हैं उनको भी पैसा भेजना है रास्ते के लिए। तो ये एक बहुत बड़ा दिक्कत डिजास्टर जब होता है तब ये होता है। ड्राउट जो है वो कच्छ में कई सालों से है, दिखता नहीं है लेकिन उनकी असर बहुत लंबी है। हर बार ड्राउट रिलीफ वर्क होता है, लेकिन परमानेंट उसमें ऐसा कुछ नहीं होता है कि वो ड्राउट के सामने वो टिक पाए। तो ये मेजर महिलाओं के ऊपर की जो इम्पेक्ट ये है। दूसरी बार जब अर्थक्वेक, तो पहले 50 साल पहले भी आया था, और फिर जब 2001 का अर्थक्वेक आया है तब यहाँ एक नेटवर्क बना था जो कच्छ नवनिर्माण अभियान के नाम पे था। लेकिन उसमें जो लीडरशिप थी वो पूरी कच्छ मेला विकास संगठन ने ली थी। और तब एक शुरुआत की थी कि सबसे पहले हमें डिजास्टर को समझना है, तो स्थानिक स्थिति क्या है। तो उस परिस्थिति को समझने के लिए लोकल लेवल पे एक एनालिसिस होता है। तो वो एनालिसिस में शुरुआत से हमने महिलाओं को जोड़ा था, भाई आप ही बताओ कि क्या स्थिति और क्या किया जाए। तो सारी महिलाओं की एक कमेटी हमने गांव लेवल पे बनाई थी, डिस्ट्रिक्ट लेवल पे भी थी, और ब्लॉक लेवल पे भी संगठनों की महिलाओं की कमेटी बनाई थी। उस कमेटी के दौरान एनालिसिस किया गया था कि रिक्वायरमेंट क्या है और सबसे पहला क्या चाहिए जिनसे हम सरवाइव कर पाए। और बेसिक बात ये थी कि जो भी हम काम करना है उनका 3 फेज था। सबसे पहले था कि तुरंत रिक्वायरमेंट क्या है उनका एनालिसिस करो। दूसरा है कि अगर बारिश आने वाली है तो उससे पहले सेमी या सेंटर उनको मिल जाए जिनसे वो सीजन से बच सके। और तीसरा है कि लंबे समय के लिए उनका रिहेबिलिटेशन हो। तो वो 3 स्टेज में हमने काम किया। तो सबसे पहले जो बात थी यहाँ पे नेटवर्क लेवल पे, कि हर रोज सुबह गवर्नमेंट के साथ और जो एनजीओ के कमेटी बनी थी वो उनके साथ हर रोज एक मीटिंग होती थी और संवाद होते थे कि रिक्वायरमेंट क्या है और गवर्नमेंट कौन सी पॉलिसी बनाए। तो एक अच्छा ये हेल्दी एनवायरनमेंट यहाँ था कि सरकार और एनजीओ सब मिलके हर रोज सुबह मीटिंग करते थे। इसमें कलेक्टर भी बैठते थे और एनजीओ के लोग भी इसमें बैठते थे, और रिक्वायरमेंट बेस पे बात होती थी। सबसे पहले बात थी टेम्पररी शेल्टर उनको मिलनी चाहिए, बारिश से पहले रोड पे नहीं बैठ सकते। और मेंटली भी वो इतने अपसेट थे कि सीधा बैठ के और राह देखे कि हमें क्या करना है, क्या मिलेगा, तो ये परिस्थिति न खड़ी हो। उसके लिए हमने यहाँ तुरंत किया था कि जो महिलाओं के साथ हुनर है यानी हस्तकला है उनके साथ तुरंत काम शुरू कर दिया था, ताकि भले घर ना हो, बाहर बैठे हो, लेकिन काम शुरू करे तो उनकी मनस्थिति भी थोड़ा डाइवर्ट हो सकती है। तो इसीलिए पहले हमने कारीगर महिलाओं के साथ सीधा काम करने का शुरू किया। दूसरा बात था कि उनके पास जो भी मकान गिरे थे उनकी जो डेब्रिस थी, वो डेब्रिस में थी वो अपना खुद का टेम्पररी शेल्टर कैसे बना सकते हैं। तो बस छोटा सपोर्ट जैसे कि 2 बैग सीमेंट है और कुछ बाम्बू वगैरह दे दिया, तो डेब्रिस में से एक कमरा उन लोगों ने अपने लिए बना लिया। तो बारिश से पहले उनके लिए एक छत हो गया। तो ये सब भागीदारी महिलाओं के साथ हुई और महिलाएं तय करती थी कि हमें क्या चाहिए। दूसरी बात थी जब परमानेंट शेल्टर बनाने की बात थी, तो सबने बोला कि क्योंकि तब एक ये भी था कि बाहर से कई संस्थाएं आई, बहुत सारे फंडिंग भी है, बोले कि चलो हम आपको मकान बना देते हैं। तो यहाँ वैल्यूज की बात नहीं थी और ना ही उनके कल्चर और उनकी जरूरत की बात थी। आज भी कच्छ में ऐसे 2-3 गांव है जहाँ आज तक कोई रहने नहीं गया, पूरा गांव खड़ा कर दिया सब सहूलियत के साथ, लेकिन आज कोई उसमें रहता नहीं, क्योंकि इसमें किसी को पूछा नहीं कि क्या चाहिए, कैसे चाहिए, और उसमें आपका वैल्यू एडिशन क्या होगा। तो ये एक बहुत बड़ी बात थी। तो हमने शुरुआत से क्या किया था कि गांव की एक समिति बनाई थी जिसमें ज्यादातर महिलाएं थी और गांव के जो 1-2 लीडर्स थे।
लता जी, जस्ट
हाँ,
वन रिक्वेस्ट,
यस
आप थोड़ा सा ब्रीफ में पूरा कीजिएगा, बिकॉज मुझे
यस
वो ट्रांसलेट करके बताना पड़ेगा,
ओके
so
ओके
that take some time. Thank you.
ओके। तो हम परमानेंट शेल्टर के ऊपर आते हैं। उससे पहले सेमी परमानेंट शेल्टर इस प्रकार 20,000 से ज्यादा हमने यहाँ बनवाए, खुद लोगों ने बनवाया और पार्टिसिपेट किया। तो एक बहुत बड़ा अचीवमेंट था, एक बड़ा कॉन्फिडेंस भी था, क्योंकि सेमी परमानेंट शेल्टर के लिए जो भी मटेरियल आता था उनका डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन महिलाएं करती थी। मटेरियल कभी रात को ट्रक आती थी, कभी अर्ली मॉर्निंग आती थी, तो ये महिलाओं ने पूरा हैंडल किया। उनकी वजह से हमारा भी एक कॉन्फिडेंस बिल्ड हुआ था कि अब हम महिला ऑर्गेनाइजेशन होते हुए भी रिहेबिलिटेशन का काम कर सकते हैं।
Thank you. Very rich experience and aspects. Let me try my best, but really, thank you, Lata ji. Very locally led and locally ownership reflect from what you
Thank you.
shared.
Yeah.
So briefly, one about the Kutch, which is one of the which is largest district of India, and it is a multi-hazard prone
Okay.
district having a drought, prone to drought, cyclone, earthquake, and also heat. In the response of 2001 earthquake, these local leaders and initiators came out and set this network, and that the key feature that they kept in from the beginning is, which Lataji found very important and crucial for the success, is on daily basis government and CSO coordination that they initiated and done with other agencies, including local collector government officials. Another one is supporting women engagement from the beginning. Like, it is not just involving and then participation, but it is also their leadership and their decision-making role. So that they initiated since the inception. They didn't wait for the fund to come, but from the beginning they initiated this. Another one point, the Kutch is well known for its art, and they start involving local artisans and mobilize the work for them, which not only helpful for economic, obvious, very strong, but on the other side, it was very helpful for the mental health also. That what they found. Shelter is not easy task, but based on the experience and local context, they manage. It evolved that it starts with the temporary shelter and then semi and then permanent shelter. So that transition provide very useful, experience and where they kept women engagement and leadership at each and every phases. One important point she mentioned about receiving money and having money for this recovery is not, I mean, that is important, but it is not enough. The more important is about the local engagement, how it is connected with the culture and connected with required sector and engagement so that need and demand can be addressed. So these are the brief. Pardon me if I miss any important point looking at time, but really very useful and inputs from you, Lataji.
Yes.
I need to move ahead, and I don't know. So much important points coming out, but don't want to miss this opportunity to ask Ramaraj sir that how can we be more directly involved in heat smart schools? So we means this community and sector. If you can reflect what you have shared about community of practices, very rich and resourceful thing. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you for this interest. The Heat Smart Schools was a very specific community of practice that we helped set up on our own learning platform. We call it DRI Connect. We keep bringing together practitioners, experts, and interested, officials in such communities. They produce a very specific output, and the output was the Heat Smart Schools guidance that was generated. And now the focus is on seeing it getting applied, it getting utilized, it informing practice. So we are collaborating with the interested partners. For instance, GIZ is looking at, they have a program on addressing heat in different areas. So we've suggested that maybe they could utilize this guidance document to look at how the schools that they wish to take for piloting could be, informed the work that happens at the schools. So for those that are interested, one is, of course, you could please visit our DRI Connect platform, where there is an opportunity to pose questions, but also to get responses from experts. But if you wish to contribute your own experiences, we'd also be very happy to document them about your own successes and some of the challenges. Thank you.
Very useful. This is really a big opportunity for all of us to, inform about this important work need to be documented. One request for Professor Rajan, if you can share your point about what can be done to make each new home extreme heat resilient.
I'll try to open my video, but until then, so yeah, each home, I think it starts with basic design. If you can reduce the heat gain, if you are in a tropical country, by the way you orient your building, so having lesser windows on east and west side, having windows on a south butt with a certain kind of shade on top. If you put a windows on east and west, make sure that it is also very well shaded vertically. Use material which has an insulation value inside, not just simple concrete. If you use a brick, and if you can increase the thickness of the brick, if it is if it is roof, you should have a very reflective surface on the roof. Also, try to insulate the roof. These are some of the basic points. What we are seeing nowadays, that along with the heat, as I was mentioning, humidity, that means the windows which you put, try to put many windows but smaller ones. That means if it is one big window, if you open it, suddenly you'll get a lot of hot air. But if you have many compartments in a window, you can open one window, smaller one, get a good ventilation, but at the same time you will not be getting a lot of heat through the air. There are a number of guidelines, Government of India's guidelines. If you type Rachna, RACHNA, and I'll try to put it on a chat here as well. It's a guidebook which helps you to understand how do you really design your houses. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Again, really practical and each of very simple to follow while from the planning point of view. Looking at time, thank you. I respect this interest and also the local perspective that so far has been shared. Because of time limit, one hand is raised. Lalita ji, you have any point? I request to keep it very brief. And you have a question?
No, मैंने कुछ सेवा के बारे में बोलना था, इसलिए मैंने
Okay. But if you want to share, just keep it very आप एकदम short में रखिएगा. हमारे पास time बहुत कम है इसलिए.
मेरा नाम ललिता है। मैं सेवा गुजरात आनंद खेड़ा डिस्ट्रिक्ट में लोकल कोऑर्डिनेटर हूँ। क्योंकि मुझे भी बताना था कि यही हमारा जो भूकंप या पूर हर बार हर थोड़े थोड़े ईयर्स में आ रहा है। तो मुझे आनंद खेड़ा में भी ऐसा हो रहा है, क्योंकि हमारे 2001 में जैसे भूकंप हुआ था, उस समय में हमारे जो बच्चे थे वो डर गए थे ने तुरंत वो पूरा परिवार जो कि हमारा असंगठित वर्ग में हमारे आनंद खेड़ा में 3 लाख संगठन है, लेकिन पूरे सेवा में हमें 40 लाख बहनें हैं। तो जैसे हमने जो खेत मजूर मैंने असंगठित वर्ग में काम कर रहे हैं, तो पूरी परेशानी भूकंप या पूर या जैसे बिपोर जो वावाजोड़ा बोलता है वो आता है उस समय में, तो दिक्कतें आती है। तो इस समय में हमको क्या करना चाहिए, क्योंकि हम पहले हमें संगठित थे, तो उस समय में हम इकट्ठे हो गए। लेकिन बिना संगठन के बारे में पूरे परेशान होते हैं। जैसे हमारा संगठन था, तो हमारा जैसे पूर आया था, तो हमने डीएमआई हमने जो 1,25,00,000 जो हमारी बहनों को तुरंत वो हमने क्या जो दिया था रकम, तो उसमें से हमारी बहनें जो पूर आफत में उन्होंने खेती नष्ट हो गई थी पूर में, तो ये क्या किया कि तुरंत वो सीड लाया, वो खेड़ लाया, तुरंत नई खेती बनाने शुरू किया। लेकिन नई जो ना नहीं मिली हो, तो गवर्नमेंट तो
ठीक है।
आता है लेकिन 6 महीने तक मिलता भी नहीं है। तुरंत हमारा संगठन ने एक्शन लिया और डीएमआई ने हमको
थैंक
भी
यू।
मदद किया।
थैंक यू ललिता जी।
ओके, थैंक यू।
थैंक यू, बहुत अच्छा रहा। Quick translation, what Lalita ji is from Anand. It is a district from Gujarat state, and she mentioned about the frequency of climate extreme event, that sometime it is water crisis, sometime it is flood, sometime it is cyclone, and the frequencies increase. And we really need to, what Dr. Nikhil said while reflecting, she mentioned about the local capacity as well as policy update. So really link this experience with that which is very much important. And then Lalita ji mentioned the same aspect, and also added that the collective action is very important, and wherever this collective action is there locally, people can be more resilient. So that's what she mentioned through organization, and she representing Seva. Let's moving ahead. Now I invite Mihir Bhai, who is Director of All India Disaster Mitigation Institute, to bring together the key insight from today's discussion and share the way ahead for connecting long-term recovery lessons with extreme heat action planning. Over to Mihir Bhai.
Thank you, Vishal Bhai. Can you hear me?
Yes, please. Thank you.
No, I'm so excited to have such special panel here to not only bring something which is so far off in our memory, the earthquake, to something so real as we speak, we are feeling, that's extreme heat. I can't think of many such efforts done to recollect past experience, learn from that, and bring it to the current ongoing crisis that is being faced. And that's not possible without first the book that Mitulji you so kindly wrote for us, and second by the panel which put the past into a very concrete present context. So thank you very much to both the author of the book as well as the panel members here. Also, the questions further embedded the presentations here into the current situation. So, Vishal Bhai, thank you for selecting those questions to put that. And other questions, I suppose, will be responded one-to-one by to each of you, and also the recording of this and text will be available in public in a short time. I wanted to focus today's discussion in terms of both concluding as well as way ahead and do it as shortly but as best as I can. So I think the central question to me is that what can long-term recovery from earthquakes and floods teach us about planning for extreme heat? That's the central question we've addressed directly and in many indirect ways. And it is not only a technical question, as we've demonstrated here, it's also a question of housing, we can conclude very much, of health, of infrastructure, very much so, of livelihoods, of women's leadership. Lataji, Lalitaji, both of you highlighted that so well. Local governance, very much, and community resilience. It's a question of equality and inclusion. So that question cannot be reduced to a technical question, and that's first conclusion. Overall, I would like to make. The second, then I'd like to go to Dr. Mitul Vahanwati's book, Resilient Recovery from Disasters, the long-term outcomes of post-disaster housing reconstruction in India, Thailand, and Japan. And it's an excellent book. We have reviewed it in terms of how do we use it. What we have found that the book has elements to be used, as you must have realized, as it was presented here, for policy purpose. It has elements which are very directly useful for training and capacity purpose. It has elements which are very useful for designing pilot projects, if any one of us want to do that. And it also has very good elements to use that as indicators for evaluating any long-term recovery work that we may decide to take up. So the book is very versatile, and anybody who wants to use it in different way should be directly contacting Dr. Mitul Vahanwati. And should you have any difficulty, feel free to be in touch with us. We'll be very happy to do that. The book, what it says is that recovery is not only reconstruction immediately after a disaster, it's a long-term process that decides whether affected communities become safer or whether earlier vulnerabilities continue in a new form. Her work also frames, and its presentation here says, that housing as a system connected with rights, disasters, climate resilient development, recovery, and resilience. Let me also add that a house is also a place of work, as we have heard and we know for thousands and thousands of people all across urban and rural areas. It's a very important book for extreme heat, and that's the reason this connection was made, partly from the demand of the people who wanted to have this particular roundtable, and partly we also realized the importance of linking past to the immediate present, urgent present. Heat action planning should not only help cities respond during a heat wave, but it should reduce the conditions that make people vulnerable to heat in the first place. It may be unsafe housing, as Raval Saab has said. It may be unsafe infrastructure, as Ramraj Saab has said. Lack of cooling by shades or trees, insecure livelihoods, limited health protection, weak local preparedness, and exclusion from decision making, as Lataji, you have pointed out. So that's the book and the presentation Dr. Mitul has said. Sri Ramraj Narasimhan's presentation on CDRI was so useful because so much money is going into infrastructure investment, not only by national government and private sector, but at individual household and neighborhood level as well. And that's all private money going. So how do you put that extreme heat affects critical infrastructure, local infrastructure, small infrastructure, micro infrastructure, including buildings, roads, railways, energy systems, schools, transit systems, and cooling centers that we are more and more building, either building new or assigning existing building for that purpose. It also reminded us, Ramrajji, that power systems are a critical missing link when heat increases, cooling demand and services are under stress. But as the power system changes from non-renewable to renewable and from centralized to decentralized, it becomes even more important to go back to this particular presentation and see what concrete actions we can take. And there are many that this particular presentation offers us to do that. So thank you, CDRI, for this presentation and the work. Professor Rajan, how can I thank you? It seems thanking myself, but your work is so much brought attention to thermal comfort, housing design, humidity, indoor heat, and human well-being all together in a very succinct way. A key message I always learn from you otherwise, but also today, indoor heat and human well-being are both so well connected. And the key message is that temperature alone does not tell the full story. It doesn't tell full story at all. Indoor conditions, building materials, ventilations, as you said, one big window, three small windows make a hell of a difference. The sleep, heart rate, and productivity also matter to the individual, to the shelter, to the family inside the home, to the settlement and neighbors, and to the landscape around that. So thank you, um, Professor Rawal. Lataben, thank you for your presentation in Hindi. And I'm very glad we had that in Hindi. It was very much needed. And from Kutch, you reminded us that women and communities are central to recovery. Your example was from earthquake recovery, but how much it is important for heat recovery as well. And we've just started heat response so far, but we've not really looked at heat recovery per se. Most of heat action plans again focus on heat response, but not related to heat recovery. So your presentation really gave us a very clear direction that it has to be uh, uh, um, led by women, organizing, role of SETU, role of local organizations, vis-a-vis outside organizations coming in, the way funding is spread, etc. And to that, Lalitaben, you added your Kira experience as well, briefly. But that's the conclusion I take from your presentation, that extreme heat, women, workers, caregivers, informal workers, women's group must be recognized not only as a vulnerable group, but as planners, communicators, monitors, and leaders at all stages of cooling process that we are planning. So that's the conclusion. The way ahead, I have been somewhat selective in terms of I've avoided way ahead which are very obvious, and I've avoided way ahead which may be too far at this stage to pick up. And obviously, we have less time, and I thought we'll take up 5 way aheads. And the first way ahead, drawing from Ritul, Ben, from your work, is that heat action plans, and India is very actively making heat action plans at every level, every sectoral level, wherever it is possible to make sure that cooling becomes a day-to-day reality, that heat action plans must move from seasonal response to long-term heat risk reduction. So purpose of plan is not to take actions for immediate purpose, but for a long-term heat risk reduction. And that's something your recovery book very clearly says. They should include housing, health, livelihood, infrastructure, employment, and local governance as well. So that's something um, is the first action, to make heat action plans far more long term than immediate purpose. The second um, point I wanted to action in terms of way ahead is that, and that I draw from Ramraji, your presentation, but also CDRI's very important work, as well as SET's work, that cities and districts should map heat risk together with social vulnerability, and which includes, of course, women, workers, outdoor workers, older persons, children, migrants, informal settlement, residents, minorities, small businesses, small farmers from our point of view, Dalits, for example, and daily wage earners must be clearly visible in this planning process. So this overlap between risk, heat risk, mapping and social vulnerability mapping cannot be and shouldn't be a separate exercise, should be very much one exercise. So that's the second way ahead. And there are 1,000 ways of doing it through research and capacity building. And anybody who wants to support that from CSR or donor point of view, a whole program could be very quickly developed on that. The third, again, Mitulban, from your and Raval Saab, from your presentation, the way ahead seems that cooling centers, schools, clinics, markets, bus stops, parks, roadside plantations, and community spaces should be treated as heat resilient public infrastructure. It's not an individual or institutional infrastructure, it's a public infrastructure, which comes with certain rights, but also cooling rights, but it also comes with certain cooling responsibility for those who want to use it for public purpose, with reliable power, water, shade, ventilation, and clear operating protocols to do that. That way, far less resources will be needed to have the cooling infrastructure, and we could be able to use what's called co-benefit of existing public infrastructure. Of course, there is a whole guide which is shared by you, Ramraj Bhai, in terms of safer schools and similar ways of cooler schools. Work could be developed very quickly in terms of roads and community spaces, clinics, government offices, etc. The fourth way ahead is housing and settlement planning should promote and retrofit passive cooling, local materials, shaded streets, nature-based solutions, and thermal comfort for now, but also for the future. And then there are two areas which is needing. One is retrofitting, that what do we do with buildings which are hot, not hot spots, but hot boxes, unbearable. And what do we do with that? We can't just bring them down. So what are the retrofitting measures for cooling that could be taken? And there is some work, I know that I'm aware of that, but far more work and awareness about that is needed, as well as short-term and long-term. And last and the final way ahead, I would like to pick up from what has been presented and from the questions and comments that we have received before, during the registration and during this particular session, is that women's groups and less visible community institutions, local self-help groups, panchayat groups, ASHA workers, for example, should be partners in early warning, safe work practices, hydration awareness, and facilities available for that purpose, health monitoring, and actions that are needed at the time, and local heat response and recovery at all levels. We have to give primacy. We can't again end up having a whole system and then trying to reach the last mile, in this case, the last person without cooling. Let's start with the last person first, cooling him or her in most cases to do that. So that's an area of fifth area of action. So as a follow-up to the demand from the participants, what we've discussed here, what I have said, at least I can comment on behalf of AIDMI that will initiate a dedicated issue of a publication capturing what is presented here and capturing what discussions are has taken place on this roundtable theme. And I'll request Vishalbhai if you would capture this, and Manishbhai, you are there. So if I can commit on your behalf, maybe in a month's time, if we can keep that ready. And we invite the speakers and participants, all of you who are here, to contribute whatever you think leads us to make this reality. You are welcome to do that. We are very happy to add it, rewrite it for you, put it together in some sort of a structure to do that. Case studies, field experiences, community voices, evidence, as that's very much needed, as if without evidence things don't exist, and practical lessons on how long-term recovery can inform extreme action planning. So that's our commitment, and we will do all that we have, and we will receive from you should you decide to do that, and I will encourage you to do that. And let me close with one reflection. that earthquake and flood recovery taught us that rebuilding must reduce future risk. And that's what, Mitulban, you've been saying throughout this book. Extreme heat action planning now asks us to address the reasons that cause extreme heat to the poor and vulnerable citizens of India. We cannot let our citizens be exposed to extreme heat anymore. Just this session tells us possible all measures that we can take. So extreme heat exposure for the citizens is definitely avoidable. It just needs action and support for that. Thank you very much to all of you, the panel, Ritulben, all the participants who are here, some known faces, Lars, of course, and Roy Rego, and all of you known faces and others. I thank you very much for joining this. Vishal, back to you. Joy Muller, of course, to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mirbhai, for those thoughtful concluding remarks, as well as also shaping this further by announcing the dedicated issue of SouthAsiaDisasters.net. I would really, we invite each participant to contribute such contribution that help connect affected people's experience with better planning and action will be especially welcome. So on behalf of AIDMI and RMIT University, I sincerely thank all our speakers and participants. We hope today's exchange will support more inclusive, practical, and locally grounded extreme heat action planning in India and beyond. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mitulji, Ramrajji, Rawal Sahib. Thank you. And लताबेन खूब आपका बहुत आभार मानता हूं मैं.
धन्यवाद.
Thank you, Achit bhai.
Namaste.
Namaste.
Thank you, Inalben.
Namaste.
Hippolyte Traore, thank you.
Maybe we'll touch base once again later.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mittal.
Yeah. And please feel free, all of you, to, if there is anything AIDMI can do, write to me or Vishal Bhai or Manish Bhai. We'll be very happy to do that.
Thank you, Traore, for joining and participation.
Deepaji, thank you. Dheeraj Bhai.
Thank you, Navdeep ji, for active participation through chat. Pardon for lack of time.
Lalita Ben, thank you. Saras tame kayo. Both Saras.
Thank you, Hawa, Marshi.
Of course, Professor Bhaskar Rao, thank you for joining. Any suggestions would be very useful to us. Feel free. Please let us know. Virendra Kumar, you are very regular. I really appreciate. Thank you very much.
Namaste.
Namaste, Lalita.
Namaste.
Thank you.